talks about an engineering or some sort of estimate that we go over, and you know, I mean, and when then we have a good reason why we went over it. So I would just like, I mean, I feel like we're making big decisions here, and I as an individual don't feel like I have enough background to really be able to justify if somebody in my next door neighbor came up and said to me, so why did you choose to take this path when someone else has brought up some questions about the path? Maybe it's just I need to have a little study session myself, but I would like to have it with the opposing sides at the same time, so I can hear them talk to each other and not just have one person talk to me at one time and another person talk to me at another time, and I don't have a chance to, with them together, ask questions and come to a sense in my mind what's the right thing for us to do.
Okay, so you have a couple points there. Is if you have questions as a board member, then you're able to have those conversations with anyone you want. If the entire board has questions, then that's a time when we would set something up.
Does anybody else, I mean, are you all really comfortable? Am I the only, because if I'm the only one, I can try to produce my own little study session and figure out a way to do it. But if anybody else feels that they could benefit from that, then I would like to suggest, since it keeps coming up and we keep having these contracts brought to us.
Okay, so that's a question we just ask of the board if people have opinions. But if it's an individual board member, then you know you can set up your meetings with whomever. So any other board comments on this before?
Well, I have two questions for Mr. Cody, which is one, how did staff arrive at, the first question is, how did staff arrive at the recommendation for taper? What was the deciding factors?
Excuse me, we had provided to the board an analysis that was provided as an attachment. And this is, as we're talking about, we have done some improvements to some of the original processes when we started out with the lease-leaseback. So we've gone to a little bit more in-depth process on looking at overall qualifications of those that are submitting proposals on these, and the attachment on there includes that analysis.
So I'm looking at one that says 1627 PSA analysis. Is that what I should be looking at?
That is correct.
That's what you're referencing. So I see three qualitative pieces, or well, three rankings of 1, 2, and 3, and then, and I'm not even sure is that a queue or is that a search for like a, that is a queue for qualified? Okay. And then I down at the bottom I see PSA evaluation, but I don't get a sense, I mean, just when I eyeball it, you know, it seems clear that the Bachman Woody was the third choice, but there's a mix of 2, 1, 2, and then down at the bottom there's a, you know, general conditions. Vanden Boss is the lowest. So I look at this and I don't intuitively understand how you selected.
What I would normally do when I'm doing this type of evaluation is, first of all, I want to look at the general conditions to make sure that the submitter has an idea on what the district's looking for. This doesn't mean that this is a contract we are giving to any particular contract for this value. This is just an indicator on whether or not they understood what the district was looking for. The contract that we're looking at tonight has a $0 impact to the district. So what we're putting forward is $0. The next items that are down there is what the markups would be on the bids that the contractor is required to receive, and it's based on a value that the subcontractor is submitting. If it's a certain value, the contractor has to go out and bid to a certain number. On the last leaseback that I brought to the board, the contractor brought in his entire bid package, and they opened up their book and they said, All right, for this scope of work, we received these bids. So they showed us everything that we would not normally see in a competitive bidding process. Usually in a competitive bidding process, that's all unseen by the district. But they come in with all of their bids. We look at all of that with them. We kind of work with them to say, well, you know, we've had some issues with this particular company's bonding company, or we've had some issues with stop notices on this contract, and we make kind of a collaborative decision on the best contractor for the district. So we see everything, and we had a 4 to 5 inch binder on the Mount Diablo S-Wing renovation that we did. So they came in, they showed us all of their estimates, all of the information that was attached, the scope of work that was included, which is another thing that in a competitive bid you don't always see, whether a contractor excludes certain portions of it. And a lot of times it gets very busy on bid days and you might miss something on it. So we're seeing all that information, but I want to be clear tonight that this action tonight was $0 value.
Can you explain, so PSA evaluation, what those different things mean? General conditions, GCP/MO, markup sub. I understand it's 12 and 5%, but 12 and 5% of what?
Usually, excuse me, usually general conditions, again, we give a milestone schedule in the contract. I'm going to reference back to Mount Diablo real quick, in that originally we had given a 6-month project schedule on 2 phases. During the PSA process for Mount Diablo, the contractor came back and said, we can do this in 4 months. So what they submitted on the original PSA that we approved was much higher in value, but then as we looked at the scope, as we looked at the schedule, they were able to lower the general conditions. This particular item on an evaluation gives me an idea that the contractor understands the scope of the work that the district is looking for. So I'm looking for a huge variance in this number. I'm not looking for this number to be my determining factor. It just gives me an idea on what the general contractor is looking at when he looks at in terms of schedule and complexity of the job. The second item would be that top number broken down on a per month basis. So if we're telling the contractor this is a 14-month contractor, they're going to take that number divided by 14, and that's the number we're seeing. The next items on subcontracted work, excuse me, this is where we see the markup. So a subcontractor will provide a general contractor a bid for, say, $1,000. The markup of 5% is the general contractor is usually entitled to mark up subcontracted work. That varies from contractor to contractor depending on their margin. That cost is added to, if we're doing a competitive bid, we would only see that in the base bid number. The contract or the markup on self-perform work, that includes a little bit more of the contractor's overhead and their profit margin also. So what that is that's a combination of what you don't see on the subcontractor is his overhead costs. So the subcontractor may have a higher overhead cost. The general contractor is just taking that cost they get from the subcontractor, adding 5%, and then that's included in the base work. The markup on self-performed work is 12%. And then contingencies, we identify what our contingencies we're planning on doing.
Okay, so, yeah, and I don't want to hold a special meeting right here on this item. If it really, truly is an issue, I mean, if we should just have a separate meeting on this, because we could be here for some time. Right now, we don't have any action on this.
I believe we'd offered, OHS has offered to come up and meet with the board. I think they were here one night and they kind of got moved forward very quickly.
Right, well, and you did something with the Measure C committee. You tried to do a lease-leaseback presentation, but then you didn't have a quorum, so I know that was an issue. Mrs. Mayo, final comment? I'm gonna, because...
Well, I would be willing to make the motion, it's just that if the motion fails, then staff has to bring it back in another way. If we postpone the motion, or not postpone, if we ask staff to bring it back on another day, then we can consider it as presented. The challenge is, staff has taken this out to bid, even though one individual of our community finds fault with that. There was an input process, and staff has put quite a bit of work into this,